All right, let's talk about a thinker who was so revolutionary, they call him the second Buddha. His name is Nagarjuna, and he basically took a wrecking ball to our most fundamental ideas about reality itself. And honestly, his philosophy is just as mind-bending today as it was almost 2,000 years ago. So to really get Nagarjuna, you have to understand the huge problem he was trying to solve. Back in 2nd century India, all the big thinkers were stuck on this massive contradiction. I mean, look around. Everything changes, right? Things are born, they grow, they fall apart. But for something to be what it is, doesn't it have to have some kind of core essence? You know, a fire has to have fireness. But here's the kicker. If that essence is permanent, how can it ever change? And that's where we'll start, with this puzzle of change. This wasn't just some tiny academic footnote. It was a deep crack in the very foundation of Indian philosophy. It was a logical knot that nobody could seem to untie, and it was setting the stage for a total revolution. The big idea everyone was working with at the time was something called svabhava. It's a Sanskrit word that means own being or self-nature. Basically, it's the idea that everything, and I mean everything, has this unchangeable, independent core that makes it what it is. A chariot has chariot svabhava. The problem? Well, if a chariot's essence is fixed forever, it can't ever become anything else. It can't even become a broken chariot. So the very concept that was supposed to explain what things are was making change totally impossible. And this is where he comes in. Into this total intellectual gridlock walks an Nagarjuna, a guy with a completely different plan. He didn't even try to untie that knot. He just took out a sword and sliced right through it. So Nagarjuna lived during this incredible time of intellectual ferment in India. He was born around 150 CE and was even an advisor to a king. So, this wasn't some hermit locked away from the world. He was right there in the middle of it, tackling the biggest philosophical fights of his day. And the impact he had was just seismic. In Mahāyāna Buddhism, he's considered second only to the Buddha himself. You don't get a title like that for just, tweaking a few minor details. You get it for fundamentally changing the game. And here's the key. Nāgārjuna looked at the whole philosophical scene and realized that everybody was playing by the wrong rules. They were all desperately searching for these ultimate, fixed building blocks of reality. And his brilliant, radical insight was to ask, what if there aren't? And that question leads us to his master key. The one concept that unlocked his entire philosophy, sunyata, or as it's usually translated, emptiness. Now, this is maybe the most misunderstood idea in all of Buddhist philosophy, so let's be super clear. When Nagarjuna says things are empty, he does not mean they don't exist. He means they are empty of that fixed, independent essence, that svabhava that everyone was so sure had to be there. Nothing, he argued, exists all on its own. Yeah, let's really break this down. Emptiness is not a void. It's not nothingness. It's absolutely not some nihilistic idea that life is pointless. It's the exact opposite. It is interconnectedness. It is the lack of a fixed essence. And because of that, it's the potential for all change. Emptiness is what makes a dynamic reality possible in the first place. And here are his own words, which really get to the heart of it. He said, all is possible when emptiness is possible. Nothing is possible when emptiness is impossible. Just think about that. If things had a permanent, locked-in essence, a seed could never become a tree. A person could never learn or grow. Emptiness is the very thing that allows everything to happen. It is potential. Here's a really simple way to get it. The idea of short. It has zero meaning by itself. It's not a thing that exists on its own. It only comes into being in relation to the idea of long. And Nagarjuna said that's how everything works. Everything arises together in a huge web of relationships, not as little standalone islands of essence. So, armed with this incredibly powerful idea, Nagarjuna didn't just write down his theories. No, he walked right into the debate hall and became one of the most feared logicians in Indian history. And his strategy was just brilliant. He wouldn't offer up his own theory of reality because that would just be falling into the same trap. Instead, he would take his opponent's argument, accept all their starting points, and then use their own logic to show how their conclusions were completely absurd. It's like he wouldn't build his own castle, he'd just show you that yours was built on quicksand, using your own blueprints. And his favorite tool was this devastating piece of logic called the Koti. It just demolishes every possible way something could supposedly come into being. Okay, let's walk through it. 1. Can a thing arise from itself? No, that's absurd. It would have to already exist to create itself. 2. Can it arise from something else, something totally separate? Well, no, because if they're truly separate, how could one possibly cause the other? 3 and 4, coming from both or neither, they lead to the same kind of logical dead ends. By knocking out all 4 possibilities, he showed that the whole idea of things arising from some fixed source just doesn't work. And he aimed this logical weapon at everybody. He went after the Brahminical idea of an eternal soul for sure, but he also targeted his fellow Buddhists, many of whom had started to think of reality as being made of tiny, fundamental particles, each with their own little swabhava. For Nāgārjuna, any philosophy built on a foundation of fixed stuff was built on sand. And all of this logic, all this deconstruction, it leads to his most shocking and, honestly, most profound conclusion. There is not the slightest distinction between samsara and nirvana. This is probably Nagarjuna's most famous line, and it's a shocker. How could there be no difference between the endless cycle of suffering and the ultimate goal of liberation? It sounds like he's pulling the rug out from under the entire point of Buddhism. So just to make sure we're on the same page, samsara, that's our everyday world, right? The cycle of suffering, driven by our attachments and confusion. Nirvana is the goal, total freedom from that suffering. And Nagarjuna says they're the same thing.
So what on earth could he mean? Well, if everything is empty of a fixed, separate nature, including samsara and nirvana, then they can't be two totally different places or states. They have to arise from the same interconnected reality, which means liberation isn't about escaping from this world to some other perfect place. It's about radically changing how you see this world, right here and right now. Freedom isn't a change of location. It's a change of perspective.
And that just gets right to the heart of it. Nirvana isn't on the other side of the universe. It's right here. The world of suffering and the world of peace, they share the exact same space. When you understand emptiness, you don't destroy the world or escape it. You finally see it clearly for the very first time. And that leaves us with a final thought, one to really take with you. Because Nagarjuna's philosophy, it's not just some abstract game. If he's right, if you don't have a fixed, unchanging essence, no permanent swabhava, then what does that mean? It means you aren't defined by your past or your failures or what you think your limits are. You, like everything else, are empty. And because you are empty, you hold the infinite potential for change.